John chapter 6. Jesus continues his public ministry and miraculously feeds more than 5,000 people. We find from Matthew that Jesus had moved on from Jerusalem to Nazareth. Upon hearing that John the Baptist was killed by Herod, Jesus got into a boat with his disciples. They crossed to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. See Matthew 14:13. Crowds followed Jesus because they saw the miraculous signs he did in healing the sick. Some saw Jesus get into the boat. They anticipated where Jesus was going and actually arrived there ahead of him. Mark 6:33. After these things, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is also called the Sea of Tiberias. A great multitude followed him, because they saw his signs which he did on those who were sick. Jesus went up into the mountain, and he sat there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. John 6:1-4. Jesus taught them. He healed the sick. It was getting late and the disciples urged Jesus to send the crowd away so they could find food, etc. Instead, Jesus used what was at hand. A young boy contributed his dinner. With that, Jesus fed the crowd, 5,000 men with their families. So, many thousands were filled by that small contribution. Jesus, therefore, lifting up his eyes, and seeing that a great multitude was coming to him, said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread, that these may eat?" This he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may receive a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are these among so many?" John 6:5-9. Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in that place. So the men sat down, in number about 5,000. Jesus took the loaves, and having given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to those who were sitting down. Likewise also of the fish as much as they desired. When they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the broken pieces which are left over, that nothing be lost." So they gathered them up, and filled 12 baskets with broken pieces from the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. John 6:10-13. The crowd is amazed at the miracle and considers making Jesus king by force. Let's think about this for a second. The Jews were looking for a Messiah. The Jews were looking for a king who could help them shake off their Roman overseers. They had a very limited view. The gospel is so much more, so much better. Salvation. When therefore the people saw the sign which Jesus did, they said, "This is truly the prophet who comes into the world." Jesus therefore, perceiving that they were about to come and take him by force, to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself. John 6:14-15. And the crowd seems to have it that limited, worldly perspective. Here was a man who could heal the lame and the sick. He could feed many thousands with a young child's dinner. You could build quite an army around those skills. That was not in Jesus' plan. He had the disciples get into the boat and head back. Matthew 14:22. He dismissed the crowd and left quickly to a solitary place. He did not give the crowd opportunity to seize him and try to force him to be their king. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, and they entered into the boat, and were going over the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not come to them. John 6:16-17. While the disciples are crossing by boat, Jesus joins them walking on the water. The disciples were terrified. They thought Jesus was a ghost. Matthew 14:26. John doesn't give the details, but this is when Peter asked Jesus to allow him to walk on the water with him. Peter seems to have walked a bit, but his faith was limited. Peter started to sink, but Jesus caught him. The sea was tossed by a great wind blowing. When therefore they had rowed about 25 or 30 stadia, they saw Jesus walking on the sea, and drawing near to the boat, and they were afraid. But he said to them, I am. Don't be afraid. They were willing therefore to receive him into the boat. Immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. John 6:18-21. There was another time that the disciples thought Jesus was a ghost. After the resurrection. See Luke 24:37-39. Some cults teach that Jesus was not raised in the flesh. After the resurrection they teach he was a spirit. Jehovah's Witnesses teach that. Others teach Jesus never came in the flesh at all. The idea being that flesh is inherently evil and only spirit is good. In the Luke passage Jesus himself declared he was not a spirit, or a ghost, same word in Greek. In Luke we find the resurrection body is flesh and bone, and we will be like him in the resurrection. 1 John 3:2. The crowd that would make Jesus king is double-minded. They are ready for fleshly things but not for spiritual things. On the next day, the multitude that stood on the other side of the sea saw that there was no other boat there, except the one in which his disciples had embarked, and that Jesus hadn't entered with his disciples into the boat, but his disciples had gone away alone. John 6:22. Some boats landed near the spot where Jesus fed the crowd. They were probably looking for some quick income from passengers going back across the lake. However, boats from Tiberias came near to the place where they ate the bread after the Lord had given thanks. When the multitude therefore saw that Jesus wasn't there, nor his disciples, they themselves got into the boats, and came to Capernaum, seeking Jesus. John 6:23-24. The crowd went looking for Jesus. Jesus knew their hearts. Perhaps they sensed that he would not willingly become their king. Yet, even if Jesus would not be their king, at least he could feed them. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they asked him, Rabbi, when did you come here? Jesus answered them, Most assuredly I tell you, you seek me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate of the loaves, and were filled. John 6:25-26. The encounter with the crowd was similar to the encounter with the woman at the well, chapter 4. Jesus spoke of food that would endure to eternal life. Notice the similarity to the water Jesus spoke about to the Samaritan woman at the well. The crowd sought a miracle for verification. So did the Samaritan woman. She noted the well was deep. Where would Jesus get the living water without a way to draw it? It would take a miracle. Jesus spoke to the crowd of the true bread from heaven that would give life to the world. They wanted it. Sir, from now on give us this bread. Verse 34. The Samaritan woman wanted the water. Sir, give me this water. John 4:15. Jesus had a spiritual, theological discussion with the crowd and with the Samaritan woman. Still, the outcome was different with the crowd. Don't work for the food which perishes, but for the food which remains to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. For God the Father has sealed him. They said therefore to him, What must we do, that we may work the works of God? Jesus answered them, This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent. They said therefore to him, What then do you do for a sign, that we may see, and believe you? What work do you do? Our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness. As it is written, He gave them bread out of heaven to eat. John 6:27-31. The Samaritan woman recognized Jesus as the Messiah. The crowd did not. Jesus spoke to the crowd of eternal life. That life comes not by works. It comes by belief, faith, grace. Jesus spoke in spiritual terms. After all, God is spirit. Those who would worship God must worship him in spirit and in truth. They did not understand. They began to grumble. How could Jesus say he came down from heaven? Was he not Joseph's son? We know his mother and father. Jesus therefore said to them, Most assuredly, I tell you, it wasn't Moses who gave you the bread out of heaven, But my Father gives you the true bread out of heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down out of heaven, and gives life to the world. They said therefore to him, Lord, always give us this bread. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will not be hungry, and he who believes in me will never be thirsty. John 6:32-35. Jesus explains he is the bread from heaven. Whoever eats his flesh and drinks his blood will live forever. How about that for a hard saying? Taken literally, Jesus was speaking of cannibalism. I think that would be a difficult saying if heard in our society without a good deal of explanation. It would have been at least as difficult to Jesus' hearers. The law had many rules against eating unclean meats and blood. But I told you that you have seen me, and yet you don't believe. All those who the Father gives me will come to me. Him who comes to me I will in no way throw out. For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is the will of my Father who sent me, that of all he has given to me I should lose nothing, but should raise him up at the last day. This is the will of the one who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him should have eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. John 6:36-40. Remember, the crowd was already grumbling about Jesus claiming he came down from heaven, and Jesus gave them more information in the midst of their grumbling. To have life one must eat his flesh and drink his blood. The saying was true. Jesus produces and sustains spiritual life. Just as we need food for physical life, we need Jesus for spiritual life, eternal life. But the crowd did not hear the spiritual meaning behind the words. Perhaps the intention behind using the difficult saying was the same as the reason for teaching in parables. See Matthew 13:13-15, 34-35. Jesus knew what was in a man's heart. Verse 6, 64. See John 2:25. The Jews therefore murmured concerning him, because he said, I am the bread which came down out of heaven. They said, Isn't this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How then does he say, I have come down out of heaven? John 6:41-42. Many of his disciples also could not hear with understanding. Jesus had disciples other than the 12. Many of them were now grumbling. Therefore Jesus answered them, Don't murmur among yourselves. John 6:43. And Jesus gave them an explanation. The words I have spoken to you are spirit and they are life. Still, many of Jesus' disciples no longer walked with him. Were they ever really saved? See 1 John 2:19. See our nice salvation discussion from chapter 5. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up in the last day. It is written in the prophets, they will all be taught by God. Therefore everyone who hears from the Father, and has learned, comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father, except he who is from God. He has seen the Father. Most assuredly, I tell you, he who believes in me has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, and they died. John 6:44-49. This is the bread which comes down out of heaven, that anyone may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread which came down out of heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. Yes, the bread which I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. The Jews therefore contended with one another, saying, How can this man give us his flesh to eat? Jesus therefore said to them, Most assuredly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you don't have life in yourselves. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. John 6:50-54. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood lives in me, and I in him. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who feeds on me, he will also live because of me. This is the bread which came down out of heaven, not as our fathers ate the manna, and died. He who eats this bread will live forever. These things he said in the synagogue, as he taught in Capernaum. John 6:55-59. Not all of the disciples left. Some had hearts open to the gospel. As Peter said, verses 68-69, you have the words of eternal life. We believe and know you are the Holy One of God. Therefore many of his disciples, when they heard this, said, This is a hard saying. Who can listen to it? But Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples murmured at this, said to them, Does this cause you to stumble? Then what if you would see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak to you are spirit, and are life. But there are some of you who don't believe. For Jesus knew from the beginning who they were who didn't believe, and who it was who would betray him. He said, For this cause have I said to you that no one can come to me, unless it is given to him by my Father. John 6:60-65. At this, many of his disciples went back, and walked no more with him. Jesus said therefore to the 12, You don't also want to go away, do you? Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom would we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and know that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus answered them, Didn't I choose you, the 12, and one of you is a devil? Now he spoke of Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, for it was he who would betray him, being one of the 12. John 6:66-71. The end. John chapter 6.